Instructional leadership truly is at the heart of any successful school. I'm Paula Kennedy, and I'm an evaluation and assessment coordinator at Scoggins Middle School in the Paulding County School District. As an evaluation and assessment coordinator, I wear a lot of hats from TEKS to milestones, but really the core of what I do is instructional leadership. That's what it's very ironic that when tasked with defining instructional leadership, I found that very challenging simply because we often get lost in the weeds of all the tasks that are involved in instructional leadership. But when you peel all of that away, instructional leadership really is just enabling and empowering learning. So empowering our teachers to make our students successful. And I think you can really break that down into four separate categories. I think the most important being how we support our staff, from, selecting the right people for the right seats, training them to be able to do their very best, and then supporting them so that they can continue growing. Um, the second most important part of instructional leadership, I think, is what we do with our assessment perspective. Because as leaders, it's very important that we are continually evaluating the tools that we use with our teachers to put that data into perspective, and how we kind of guide them through making those decisions based on, not just making it based on data, but the complete data story. Because so often we pick out pieces of data, and when we don't look at multiple streams, we're not getting the entire picture. And so that's, to me, that's the most important part of what we do with our teachers in regards to data. The other two components, with curriculum, I think it's very important as instructional leaders that we are being mindful of how we facilitate that alignment and the implementation of local curriculums in such a way that we are keeping those standards at the heart of what we do. Because that's essentially the engine that drives learning. And finally, it's very important that we're providing the right resources for our staff so that they are best able to do what they do, that they have all of the tools that we can possibly provide them. And at Scoggins Middle School, that's very important to us. We are continually looking for ways to provide additional resources to our staff. We have continually sought out grant purchases, and we recently just built an outdoor classroom utilizing some local grant funding, and our teachers are really getting on board, and we've had several teachers who have added to our instructional resources through their seeking out grants. But we also provide multiple learning platforms for our teachers. We have a part-time instructional technology coach that our teachers are continually, scheduling one-on-one with, in addition to the sessions, and that leads to their awareness of different programs and platforms, and that only helps instruction in the classroom. Our actual support in the classroom is very important to us, and so we take a multifaceted approach to that. Of course, we do your typical professional learning sessions, and those, as the EAC, it's my job to plan and facilitate those. I either usually do those myself, or bring in various coordinators from the district. Every administrator in the building is involved in frequent walkthroughs. Very few days go by that everybody from our principal all the way down to myself, that very few days that we're not in multiple classrooms, and we're very intentional in providing actionable feedback when we partner with our teachers in that way. Sometimes those walkthroughs lead to coaching needs, and each of our administrative staff is very committed to those coaching relationships within, each of our administrative staff tackles a different department. And so for myself, I am the support for the ELA department. So at any given time, I have a particular coaching relationship or multiple relationships with various teachers in the ELA department. Our mentor program has really brought a lot to our school. We're very fortunate that we have historically had a veteran staff, and as that has grown to change the last couple of years, we've been able to leverage our veteran teachers and use that experience to help grow our new staff, and it's been very, very effective. Another thing that we're incredibly proud of the last couple of years, when we first arrived at the school, there really wasn't much of a need for a conference budget because the climate and culture was such that teachers weren't actually seeking out a lot of additional professional learning, that they, could control what they were learning. In the last couple of years, we've really seen an uptick in the amount of teachers who are interested in seeking that outside learning, and so we've very much committed to finding those funds to support that. Our curriculum support really has changed a lot over the last couple years. We've really began to focus on alignment, within our building, and then this coming year, we're hoping with our vertical alignment conversations that we can include our elementary feeder patterns so that they'll have a better idea of what the expectations are for their students on the other side, and our teachers will have a better idea of where their students are coming from. We've also implemented an emphasis on common assessments and our PLC structure. When we arrived 4 years ago, our entire administrative team was new at the same time. PLCs were essentially non-existent in the building. They had identified a PLC time, but essentially it was collaborative planning at best. And so we've really worked hard to build those structures. There's still some work to do, and we'll talk a little bit about that later with a key issue that we are looking to work on in the building this year. Every administrator in the building is actively involved in instructional leadership. And I think that's what's brought about so much dramatic change in such a quick span of time. Looking at the data piece, we approach that again from a multifaceted approach. We do quarterly data digs. Our PLC protocol, it relies very heavily on data analysis. Our MTSS coordinator does data triangulations with every grade level for every tiered student at least once a month, sometimes more often. This year, we're very fortunate to be able to pilot the district's new data dashboard in the Insights platform. And our teachers have been very excited to have all of their student data in one place. And I think that's really made a difference in their ability and their motivation to make data-based decisions. So those have been some very exciting changes. But I think that the key thing, probably the most important thing that has brought about our success over the last 4 years, is the fact that we have a principal who's committed to seeing himself as an instructional leader. And in the literature, a theoretical and empirical analysis, what we found was that student success began with a principle-driven commitment to instructional leadership. When that happens, there is a climate of collaboration. And with that structure of support, the collaboration reaches a level that teacher efficacy begins to grow. And we know the literature supports time and again, all the way back to John Hattie, that collective efficacy among faculty and staff is one of the greatest enablers of student success. So this pattern emerged in several ways throughout this piece of literature, and so I've pulled several key quotes from this piece of literature, but you'll see essentially it paints the picture of that chain reaction. That teacher collaboration is the pathway. Schools can increase teacher confidence through this support that builds collaboration. It's essentially the same thing over and over again, because what we see is this pattern. And each of these quotes reflects a key piece of that pattern that this study reflected. In effective instructional leadership practices in high-performing elementary schools, we found an analysis of 13 schools that essentially were being successful against all odds. Low income, diverse SES, those types of things, where often those schools get counted out, and these schools were successful against the odds. So the authors were taking a look at what created that. And so, first and foremost, what they found is that these schools had a clear mission and vision. It was communicated and there was buy-in. And a key way that this buy-in is developed is the administration as partners. And as partners, administrators need to be in classrooms. And that was illustrated in this study, that the frequent walkthroughs with actionable feedback was a key part of these schools' successes. The next element that was important was analyzing the tools that the administrators used to drive that data-driven instruction. So often we get fixated on, we hear the phrase over and over, data-driven instruction. But it's useless to make data-driven instruction if you are not using the correct pieces of data, if you are not using the correct analysis tools, if you're not getting an accurate picture of what the totality of the data is telling you, then it can simply lead you in the wrong direction. And so these schools illustrated that to have a high impact on achievement, that the administrators needed to be analyzing these tools frequently in their effectiveness. And back to what we saw in the last piece, that these collaborative discussions were utilized to support reflective practices and a sense of shared responsibility. And I've quoted that because I think those words are so critical, just as they are. We expect our teachers to reflect and we want them to share responsibility, but our collaboration is key to that happening. High expectations, I think, for schools that are traditionally underperforming, this may be the most critical piece, because so often, I've worked predominantly in Title I schools most of my career, and it's very easy for teachers and administrators alike to, even with the best of intentions, lower their expectations because so-and-so's home life is a challenge, or they don't have all of the resources, or, even sometimes we've heard our teachers, these kids can't, or it's not fair when he comes to school hungry to expect him to X, Y, and Z. And so we often lose sight of the fact that if we want them to be able to do better and be better, we have to hold them to these expectations, but create scaffolds to get them from whatever challenges that they are to a place where they can realize those expectations. So I think that was probably a critical piece of success for those 13 schools. And the last piece that they found in leadership longevity, I think, is probably going to be one of the most challenging pieces for any school in this era, because the administrator turnover, just like teachers, administrator turnover is at an all-time high. The average time that an administrator stays in place is, in a lot of districts is less than 5 years. And what they found in this study is that these schools had principals who had remained in place for more than 3 years. And so that allowed for that consistency and continuity. And I think that was a very critical piece of success for these 13 low-income schools. So moving to the next piece, the analysis of the self-evaluations and current leadership perceptions. This was very challenging for me. As an analytical person, I tend to look at what needs to be fixed and, to look accurately at strengths and areas of growth. I opted to look at our Hanover survey data, what the teacher said, because basically, that's our customer service survey if you're going to look at it from a business perspective. And so I really utilized the feedback that I got as an administrator on those surveys to complete this perception data. And there wasn't a lot of surprises. I know my areas of strength tend to be in the relationship piece, because I do work very hard to make those connections with my teachers. So the areas of relationships and collaborations and making myself available and being in the classroom, those were typically areas of strength, as well as my instructional knowledge, just because, I think regardless of what professional position I'm going to be in, I'm going to be a learner. And so in this position is really no different. I am consistently trying to be better and do better. And to do better, you have to know better. And that, I think that really is a very important part of serving our teachers. I think I'm also very intentional in providing actionable feedback, and I'm willing to kind of push up my sleeves and be there if it's co-teaching, if it's collaborative planning, if it's just coming in to be another adult body in the room. My teachers know that, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help them be successful. The flip side of that is, because I am willing to do whatever it takes to help them, I think sometimes, like the old curriculum saying, being a mile wide and an inch deep, sometimes I don't get to the depth that I really should. For example, I know my follow through with PL long term really could use work. When I implement a new strategy with my teachers, I'm there to support them until they get the hang of it. And then once we can take the training wheels off and give them a little push, I tend to move on to the next thing. And we know that long-term implementation involves more than that. And I think that's maybe an area where I lose some success with teachers. And so I need to learn to balance that a little bit better. Another area where I would like to improve this year is who I work with, because very often, our baby teachers, as I'll refer to them, are the neediest in the building, and their needs are very obvious. And our veteran teachers know what they're doing. And so even though, coaching and working with them would be just as valuable for their students, sometimes they get lost in the shuffle just because of their competency level. So I need to be more intentional in providing that support across the board. Another key area, is as we get new teachers, they're very excited and eager, for innovations and trying new things. And I'm always on board for that, but, kind of guiding them through in ways that we are being innovative, but we're still being true to those instructional foundations. So basically balance. Each of my growth areas, I think, comes back to learning to be able to balance two, various needs. For example, I want to support my teachers, but at the same time, I'm still their evaluator. And so learning how to support and coach them, but also keep them accountable at the same time. And so this was a very valuable thing because it forced me to slow down and look at each of these pieces, not just from a generalization. Yes, I know my relationships are good, but what specifically is good and what could be better. And so that was a very valuable practice for me to take each of these and analyze them a little more deeply. And so, in analyzing some of uh, my successes and growth areas, one of the key things that came glaring out at me at the data that we've looked at over the course of the summer is our various ELA PLCs. Our scores from Beacon, and then, even our milestones, if we were able to discuss those patterns, probably would reflect something very similar in what we saw. Our 6th and 7th grades did not make a lot of progress, and in fact, what we saw was actually some regression. While our 8th grade moved forward, their goals for their students, 6th and 7th grade sat, 23, 24%, while 8th grade, 57% of their students met their goals. Their Beacon growth over the course of the year from fall to spring, 6th and 7th grade had negative growth. 8th grade had a 12-point average. And if we're looking at that on paper, our 6th and 7th grade PLCs really should have been our strongest. They're veteran teachers. They're strong in, leading PLs. One of those teams even has the department head. Our 8th grade is comprised of a veteran teacher, ESEP support, one brand new first-year teacher, and a teacher who was new to middle school and new to the content area. And they were incredibly successful. But I think when you begin looking at why, not just anecdotally, because as being in their PLCs each week, it was very evident how effective that their PLCs were. But as the saying, the proof's in the pudding, and so the data really held that out. So looking at our PLCs in their data team cycle, 6th and 7th grade did not use their data with fidelity. They did not complete more than a couple cycles, while 8th grade, essentially 12 cycles every unit. And even more, because I think they completed 6 units. So multiple times during their units, they were completing data cycles to make those instructional decisions. And so we really have to look back administratively as instructional leaders. What were we doing with 8th grade that created a productive PLC? While 6th and 7th grade tend to flounder. And so the plan that we've created to address this really looks back at those pieces from the literature that we saw that work, beginning with principle-driven instructional leadership. So through our process guidance, each of the administrative staff is going to work with these groups on different elements. We're going to continue that in-seat PLC collaboration and be more vocal members of their PLCs. To continue that collaboration piece, we're going to send each of these folks to data teams training so that they can develop a data cycle that works for them. Like, we want them to take ownership of this. So if the protocol that we're asking you to do was not effective for you, then we want to guide you through developing what will work for you. So we're going to begin the year with a complete system reset. We're going to let them develop their PLCs from the ground up with their roles and norms to give them an opportunity. We've made some personnel changes in these groups as well. And so that will give them a chance for a fresh start. The quarterly data review, we're going to add a reflective collaboration piece. And overall, we've just kind of pledged as an administrative team to take different parts of the collaboration so that we're all working with them, because truly that collaboration begins with an actual presence. And so that's where we're going to begin, taking those pieces, most specifically from that cycle we discussed earlier, creating that collaboration that builds teacher efficacy. And I think that's going to be the missing piece to success for these other two teams, because they're very talented educators. We just need to get them on the same team and pulling in the same direction. And that's kind of the goal of instructional leadership. And I just want to leave you with several, or four, key quotes that I think are the best summations of what instructional leadership should be in a successful school. It really comes back to not that common phrase, not being the sage on the stage. It's not really about us, the guide on the side. We need to be that for our teachers so that our teachers can be that for our students. It's really, as Marzano says, it's the heart of instructional leadership, just being those learners, being part of a learning community so that, our teachers can support their learners. And I think that's essentially the heart of instructional leadership.